So, morning. Welcome, everybody. Today, I think we are talking about corruption, Lee. Is that right? So, yeah. So, do you ignore it? Do you comply with it? Or do you confront it? I don't know. The key is, I suppose, who it is and where you are when it happens. So, anyway, let's see what you've got to say about it, Lee. So, over to you.
Thanks so much. Muted again. There we go. Yeah, I think we, again, I'm just creating a little bit of context. How did we get to this subject? And it really, I think, goes back to, reviving a shattered economy, looking at what are the ways in which we build partnerships in order to create longevity. And what are the things, therefore, what are the barriers? What are the things that prevent us from growing, developing, making things happen? What stunts economies and what breaks up partnerships? And corruption came up as a key factor in all of those areas. And the thing is about corruption is that, like many words, it means different things to different people. And so one of the things that we would have to decide and to work out is, what do we actually mean? And it's one of the reasons why we have lawyers, because they battle it out. They have to figure out, yeah, exactly. That's, says Trevor with a lawyer daughter. Because deciding the law, deciding what is actually meant by corruption, and I've had to work this out very much with the sales teams that I've worked with. So I've worked with many top sales teams in corporates such as Dell, SAP, and so on. And they are confronted with this in an ongoing way because of expectations of both clients, potential clients, competition, what the competition is prepared to do, and suppliers. And my argument is that everyone and anyone can be tempted given the right conditions. And that would be personal conditions that make me vulnerable to a particular proposition, as well as the conditions of the context of the specific environment that makes it easy enough or simple enough to accept or to allow for a bribe. And I'm using bribery specifically as an example of corruption. And so I just want to give a couple of examples. So in recognizing that, companies put very strict regulations in place. I worked with Unilever. So I don't know what it's like now. It was a number of years ago. You had to declare every gift over the value of 100 Rand. That was the limit. You could accept, basically you could accept anything under 100 Rand, but anything over 100 Rand you had to declare. At EdCon, I worked at EdCon again a number of years ago. You could not even buy your supplier a cup of coffee because it might be misconstrued. So just knowing our propensity to fall into traps, we have to put in these rules and regulations. But I want to end off by saying that I've worked with, and I can name it, the University of Mpumalanga for the last 5 to 6 years. This is a new university. It is literally, it's the first new university that South Africa has built since the new dispensation. And it inherited a system where parents paid extra to get their kids admitted into the college or the tertiary institution. That there was an application form that was equal to everybody, and then there was an envelope that put your kid above in the rest of the queue. And this university, from the day it opens its doors, made it an absolute policy that it would not accept that envelope. And it has stood its ground against staff members who were used to that being the way of doing things and have subsequently had to be fired. They've had protests, they've had staff protests, they've had student protests, they've had all kinds of manipulation thrown at them in order just to ensure that this kind of activity would continue. And they've stood their ground against all kinds of pressure. And 5 years later, that practice is no longer acceptable. No parent comes now with any envelope because they know it does not work. So that's by way of saying that, by opening the conversation, love to hear what for you is corruption. How do we hold our ground? Yeah, let us open the conversation.
Great, thanks, Lee. Yeah, and what Lee didn't mention is she's been running an ethical leadership training course with the senior staff there at the University in Mpumalanga. So yeah, so I think it's partially due to their policies and their insistence, but also obviously input from people like Lee, which helps move the process ahead. And it's fascinating to me because Lee mentioned various corporates that have these very strict policies in terms of gifts and things, and I'm sure many of them used large auditing firms to assist them in those processes. And haven't we had some problems with our large auditing firms in the recent past that have fallen prey to these things themselves, despite all these rules and regulations, and had to pay big fines and refund monies and fire people and all sorts of interesting things. So it's a very pervasive challenge, I think, right across society, unfortunately. I had an interesting situation fairly recently, and again, unfortunately, I'm not going to mention names, but a certain individual who had invested in a small company a couple of years ago was then found to be with his fingers in all sorts of different tills and things like that. And when these folk were trying to disengage him from their organization once all this broke, he accused them of being disingenuous, and he never did business this way, and all sorts of interesting things. But I mean, he's been found guilty and fined, and all sorts of interesting things have happened to him since then. But as Lee was saying, what is corruption? In the mind of the individual, he's an ethical businessman, but in the minds of the law and everybody else in society, he's a highly corrupt individual who has benefited massively from all sorts of illicit activities. So yeah, is it simply in the mind of the beholder? I don't know. So I think we better go across to our accountant to kick off. So Ed, over to you.
Yeah, this is very appropriate because there were two pieces of news in the UK yesterday. One was the fact that for the first time ever, an unexplained wealth order has been successful. We have this system whereby if you've got loads of dosh and you can't explain where it came from, then it can be taken away from you until you can explain where you got it from. And there was a guy in the Northeast who they thought was a money launderer, but they could not actually prove it. So they just issued this unexplained wealth order. And I think there's only been 5 issued, and 2 of them have been defeated in the courts. But he settled rather than go to the court. and they took away 10 million quid from him in properties and stuff. So I think that was really interesting. I'll come to the other thing later, but what really got me about Lee's example with the, you know, you're not allowed to accept a gift from a client or whatever in the firm she worked for, and she talked about sales. Most of the places I've been to, that's kind of standard practice. You can't take gifts from clients, etc. But all the rules are designed to protect the company. And all the ills that have been done in the past in financial services has come about because of commission. If you're a bit strapped for cash, you can't pay your mortgage, I think you call it a bond, what do? And you're not meeting your sales targets. You sell an inappropriate product to someone that it shouldn't be sold to get the commission. And in the UK, we've had the endowment policy mis-selling scandal. We've had the payment protection insurance mis-selling scandal. And we've also had the pension mis-selling scandal, where people have been corrupted by the system to pay, to sell stuff to people that don't need it. So I think the system can corrupt people. I've seen it also with expenses. I used to audit a lot of trade unions. Most of the sort of people on the sort of grassroots, really honest, hardworking, decent people. By the time they get on the executive council, they are fiddling their expenses so much you just would not believe it. And I, in fact, had one guy who I found was claiming mileage, and he couldn't even drive. And then, of course, we had our MPs in their expenses scandal. So I think systems corrupt people. I'd like to think there are people who are incorruptible, but I'm not so sure. Fortunately, no one's offered me millions of dollars yet, so I can't say what my price is. But it's $54 million if you want to know, because that's what I worked out. I would need to kind of leave my home, leave my family, set up life in a country of no extradition. I think when we talk about corruption, we tend to focus on money, and there are other forms of corruption. The other report that came out yesterday in the UK was into child abuse in the Church of England. And they were severely criticised for, and I've got the wording here, it was an independent report going back over years. The church did not take allegations seriously and neglected the physical, emotional and spiritual well-being of young people in favour of protecting its reputation. And I think that is another form of corruption, where you put the reputation of your organisation before doing the right thing. And we've seen it in political parties, we've seen it in companies, we've seen it in charities. I think the World Wildlife Fund at the moment is investigating some wrongdoing. And I think we saw that one in Haiti, where the relief charity was involved in things that weren't very nice. So I think we should think broadly when we think of corruption. So, and I don't know whether there's any cure for it. Certainly, you know, in companies you can introduce measures to make sure people don't nick the money. But how do you do it in governments? How do you do it in business? I don't know.
Great, thanks, Ed. Yeah, there's lots of different ways to influence and engineer situations, aren't there? So, Trevor Carty, I think we better come across to you next. You've been popping in and out over the last couple of days. Actually, haven't had a chance to chat to you with all your running around and disconnecting and reconnecting.
So I think it comes down to defining how you define corruption. Is the secretary who needs stationery at home for her child, who takes an extra sleeve of staples, is she corrupt, or is she just a thief? Or is she just desperate? So the question really is, what do I do when I find that she's got the extra staples in her bag? How do I step up to the plate as leadership? How do I engage with her to find out that I'm not paying her enough, or that her situation is so dire at home that she's actually using the staples to keep her mother's teeth in, or whatever the case is. So no excuse for dishonesty. It's you say that. I watched a movie last night called The Invention of Lies. You've got to watch it, where everyone is so blatantly honest about everything until the first guy tells a lie. And so corruption, I think, goes very closely to the word lie or dishonesty. And then it's the degree of dishonesty you're prepared to put up with before the outcome becomes so negative that it influences your family and your lifestyle. And that ultimate is jail or death. So, you define how far you'll go. We've seen all sorts of corruptions. It doesn't matter whether you're an auto manufacturer, whether you're a drug manufacturer, whether you're a pension product peddler, whether you Food Lovers Market. Is what Checkers is now doing, encouraging us to get these little pot plants by going to spend our money at their shop. Is that corruption? I don't know. So you got to decide how far you'll go, and you got to decide how far you'll let others go with you, and draw a line in the sand for yourself and draw a line in the sand for others. And if the line in the sand is the same for both of you, well, then you've at least got congruence. And if there's congruence, you can define it. So, in our house, the lady that comes to look after my family, she has free access to the fridge, and she can eat whatever she wants, whenever she wants, but within reason. The other day, she was making the best sandwich I've ever seen, and she was wrapping it up. And I said, "What's that for?" She said, "No, that's for dinner." I said to her, "Okay, whoa. That's too far. You can have this sandwich here before you go home, but you can't wrap it up, take it home in the taxi, and then have it when you're not here." So, corruption happens in front of you, it happens behind you. I just love South Africa. For the first time, we're starting to try and get a definition of corruption. What we have seen in the last 10 days in this country is epic, monumental. It comes down to leadership, and sometime someone's going to pull a trigger and say, "Okay, well, whatever comes falling down on my head, I've now got to take it as far as it goes." So, it's properly exciting to be. And I wish I had been involved as an investigator in corruption, or a reporter on corruption, because it's just so exciting how people are corrupted and how the system is corruptible, and how we build systems, Trevor, that are corrupt to start. That's why we build the system. And then while I sit here on Wisdom's 1, 2, 3, there's Facebook listening to us in the background, stealing all our material. And so how do we do it? So, yeah, the fish froths from the head. And if the tail gets a chance to tell the story about the fraught head, because it's now got to be cut off, that's when life gets exciting.
Thanks, Trevor. Yeah. As you were talking, lots of little stories came to mind, but I'll save mine for a little bit later. So, Donovan, let's get across to you just next.
Morning, everyone. I'm just aligning my comment to what I put on the chat box. Corruption is equal to contamination. So whoever is guilty of it, their hands are obviously contaminated, and their hands need to be sanitized. So it's a continuous process. Maybe someone needs to check and scan the hands, see how much contamination there is, and then deal with the situation. Either sanitize or exterminate, or whatever needs to be done. So the problem is not the system, but an internal fault within the system which needs continuous correction or upgrade. So it's the same as when the bank releases a product. They always have to make sure it's secure. They need to look at gaps in the software or any faults or any possible opportunity that's created for thieves, just to continuously look at their systems and closing the gaps. So it's a continuous process, and it's caused by people, I think, that causes the need for someone to look at the situation and clear up and tidy up. Thank you.
Right, thanks, Donovan. Yeah, it's interesting, it's a bit of, for me, a little bit of what comes first, is it the system or the people, or is it the people or the system? And do the people create the system? I mean, people do create systems. So yeah, it's almost like a never-ending cycle that you've got to go through, but lots of different challenges. Cecile, let's hear your thoughts.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and like Ed, I must say, unfortunately, I am not rich yet because I've never succumbed to any bribes. Whenever people want to say to me, you've got to do this or that to get this deal, then I just quietly leave without doing that. Just one. I know that there's a lot of corruption in the government, but I've not come across that because I've consciously not done business dealings with government because of all the horrible stories I've heard. But in this PPE game that I've been dabbling in the last 6 months, I'm not sure if greed is part of corruption. But boy, people want to they want to become millionaires overnight, buyer's mandates. And they don't even think it's strange to say, oh no, come on, 1 cent on 200 million deal is not enough. It won't go, and then the deal is off. So I've been dealing with corrupt lawyers, corrupt all kinds of people in this last 6 months. But just to step off that, interesting, I think something that Trevor said, when I first started doing telephone management systems, I went to a seminar on telephone management systems. Now, I'm sure most of you know that what it is. It's a system that at the end of the month will tell the boss, Cecile made this many calls, Trevor made this, Ivan made this, whatever type of thing. And they found that people that abuse the telephones in their offices, they are the same people that steal the coffee, steal the sugar, steal the paper, the whatever. So it is a good measurement of your staff to see how they are using or misusing the telephone, because that is a characteristic. That's what they found. It's a characteristic of a person to abuse, not just the telephone, but abuse all the other things that your employer can offer you. So maybe, yeah. So it is a characteristic. It's people would think that's the way to do business. It's my company. I work for this company. I'm entitled to, and maybe entitlement is the word that brings the worst out in people where corruption comes. So that's my little bit of it. Very interesting discussion.
Okay, thanks, Cecile. Okay, Herman, welcome back, and let's get over to you.
Well, you're talking to a guy who's been very involved in bribing for many, many years. My first posting in 1965 at a fairly young age exposed me to that. And it was quite common, particularly in certain parts of the chemical industry, and that's the only industry I know in that particular context, bribing was a norm. People and I'm referring particularly for chemicals within the textile industry. So I lived in Nigeria, I lived and worked in Thailand, and the same in South Africa, and in all three countries, we bribed our clients to, you may not know that until a few years ago, actually, bribes were tax deductible in Germany. Now, I think the world is a very corrupt place in general terms, but that doesn't mean we have to accept that. And one of my contributing factors leaving the corporate environment was actually that I was getting sick and tired of being a player in a field which was so dirty that, I mean, the more conscious and the more mature I got, let me rephrase it, the more mature I got, the more conscious I got of what I was doing for fat cats, you know? It actually annoyed me. I got cross with myself that, look, I loved my job. I enjoyed the adventures, being in different countries, traveling all across Nigeria, for example, by car was an adventure in the 60s. So, but as I said, eventually I realized, hey, you're in such a dirty game. And the most ironic thing was that the companies, and I could even name my company because it doesn't exist anymore, the companies would deny that. There was an article years back in a German news magazine, Der Spiegel, about Höchst bribing clients in South America. And they even were aware of the word we used internally in our division to cover the bribes. It was called SOSPE, which is German for special expenses. And that was we had a little department that would do the calculation of the prices. You know, it was a big factory, it's a complex process. They had, if you brought a sheet in to have a new product costed, they would say how much SOSPE should we include, how many %. So it was policy within the company. And which makes me today even more determined to say that corruption should be eradicated. Really, it should be getting rid of, because it destroys systems, it destroys human beings. Morality goes out of the window. There are no ethics left. We can't carry on living like that. Because for me, the whole aspect of corruption, bribery, is just a symptom of what is wrong with us on this planet. Maybe we could even call it corruption, what we're doing to the planet. We're corrupting the earth and so on and so forth. So, death to corruption. Thank you.
Thanks, Herman. Yeah, absolutely. And often you'll find with organizations like that, you know, the secretary will get fired for stealing a pack of paper or a few staples, but in the meantime, they're pumping cash out the back door to bribe their customers. So yeah, it's a real double standard situation that we find ourselves, I think, in many cases. So Jasper, let's get across to you next.
Morning. Yeah, I was thinking of my own corporate journey and in the companies that I worked with and what was the stance on things. And I probably haven't been on the front line as much as Herman, but I was just thinking of what is acceptable, and then some of the others, and I think was it Lee who said where they even frown upon things of less than 100 Rand or more than 100 Rand. But, you know, I think it's acceptable practice to take someone out for lunch. But that same innocent lunch can be then misconstrued to say, I'm trying to influence you. Corporate gifts, giving people corporate gifts. Now, if it's just a nice cup or a pen holder or stuff like that, people don't think twice. But I know some companies also go to very expensive liquor, where one bottle can cost you R1,000 plus kind of thing. Then, you know, at senior level, to be invited to call it a weekend away, it starts to become problematic, but at the same time, it can also be innocent. So if I'm a golf player and I get invited to attend a game at Sun City on someone else's expense, so it's this thing of it's acceptable, and it's almost an unwritten rule of I know when this is just a nice gesture, or whether you're now trying to buy my my voice or my activity on something that I disagree with. But then you have the blatant thing that we've been exposed to in South Africa, where people get money in brown bags, hard cash, or I would think in the early days of BEE and even today, just free shares in a company for the sake that you are a government representative and stuff like that. So, and then between, I want to call it soft issues and hard issues, where does the line start and where does the line stop? Because my soft issue could be already your hard issue and vice versa. So it comes back to it's almost an inner moral compass, where culture for me starts at leadership level. And at the same time, I then feel sorry for, and I was following some of the comments here of Volkswagen in our own country with some of the top audit companies and stuff like that. If I'm a junior auditor working in those companies, bright-eyed and excited about how I will change the world, and the next moment, I'm now tainted for the rest of my life and the rest of my CV that I was an employee with this company. So I fully agree with Herman that corruption is an absolute evil disease. Then I was thinking, all right, how do you stop it? Now, I think there was a lot of comment on, you know, improving systems and upgrading systems and stuff like that. I say no, it won't help, because it's like crime. You can put up the largest fence and electrical wiring and stuff around your house. My one mentor way back said, do these things, but just understand, all it does, it keeps the honest people out. And people who are on the border of becoming a criminal will probably now not becoming a criminal. But the hardened criminal will just find better ways to combat what you're doing. So a person who wants to be a crook will always be a crook. So it doesn't matter what systems you design, it becomes a pain for all the other good people too. So the reality is we do need structures. Without structures, you can't grow anything substantial and have longevity. But what we do need is, with the structures, a healthy culture that is constantly maintained. And by maintain is talk about it. You know, and the only way that you destroy corruption is by exposure. So I like that example of Trevor Carty with his maid with the sandwich. And the reality is, whatever systems you build, it's like a child. It will always be tested and to see where's the boundaries. And until you then define the boundaries for people, they will keep on testing it and testing it. So, so I think it's that culture that defines boundaries. Talk about it often so that it becomes the ingrained culture. And then where it does happen, destroy it by exposure. And so that it doesn't become attractive anymore. And so that I don't think we will always have to, while we're on earth, have to deal with people's innate greed and lust for power and things that's not theirs. But just having more systems is not going to solve it. It's a combination of mindset, culture, and systems.
Great, thanks, Jasper. Yeah, I don't think there are any easy answers. The question is, where does it all start? You know, have you ever jaywalked or broken the speed limit or parked in the wrong place? You know, is that the start of it, or is that just you know, something innocent? Chivanel, what do you think?
Oh, damn. Am I supposed to think now? Right. So a couple of the comments that I just wrote down here. Obviously, corruption kills competition. So that's why people do it, especially at grand scale. If you're sitting there with $1 billion business and someone else is getting an advantage over you, it's an unfair advantage. So what do you do to compete and stay in business? So it's a major problem. But this thing, and Lee, this might be taking you into another subject. And Herman, it's interesting having you on board here, because I was watching some movies on documentaries on Netflix, and I was absolutely amazed by the Second World War, absolute wiping out of Berlin and German cities, and then the V2 bombing or V6 bombing of London, and how these places were completely wiped out. And then I was trying to think out 1954 when I was born. I didn't really get to understand the effect of the war on my parents, etc. You know, I'm only starting to realize that that was only a couple of years before I was born. And 10 years later and 15 years later, I looked at things like the Encyclopedia Britannica and Encyclopedia Americana, and these cities were built again. They were all up and going. And I was thinking now, well, who the hell owns all this stuff now, once it's been obliterated? And how do people get into ownership of these new cities that have gone up? And then it took me back to, how did civilization really begin? And well, so all I can really see is there were guys that got onto elephants and went over the mountains. I can't remember what his name was. Was he Kublai Khan? Trevor Carty will tell me, he did history and past.
It was Hannibal.
Thank you very much. Hannibal Lecter conquered the world. Okay. What I'm saying is, civilizations through the Vikings was all about conquering, plundering. And I think we are not talking corruption in our country right now. I think we are talking plundering on a massive scale. And is it any different to the way that civilizations began? And if anyone wants to talk in African context, what did Shaka Zulu do? What did the Xhosas versus the Zulus do? What was this a power and dominate and take control? These are very interesting. I think we need to go back to this to understand why are people plundering to the extent that they are plundering right now? And are they thinking at base levels as I'm thinking that, hey, other people took it by force, and so we're going to do it as long as we can get away with it as best as we can. So these are my convoluted thoughts on, I think corruption today in this country is not corruption, it is plundering at a grand scale. And I don't even think I'm not with Trevor Carty. I don't think what's happening right now is anything more than window dressing. And I wonder just what we have to do. What would the Vikings have done? What would have old Hannibal have done if people were threatening him and coming on their giant elephants back at him? Are we going back to those early days where we actually have to take hands, legs, feet off Old Testament? So I'm not with you, Trevor Carty. I'm not joining you for a beer this week because you've upset me.
Unless he pays for it.
Oh, okay. I'm in.
And would that be regarded as a bribe? Yeah, I'm not sure. So yeah, it is. It's a very it's an emotive topic, I suppose, in many respects. It's an interesting topic and a challenging one. And does it just simply go back, as Trevor's suggesting, to the nature of human to go forth and conquer, and it's just morphed into a different existence with you know, the plundering of cash. I don't know. It's yeah, it is a real challenge.
If we start protecting our whistleblowers properly, then I think we will be able to make a dent into the local corruption. I really believe that. But they need proper protection, which they haven't got right now.
Sure. Yeah. Look, I mean, that's another challenge. Is that a system? Is it a mechanism to actually contain or manage corruption, or is it just simply something that's always going to be with us, and we've got to find ways of working in and around it, because the nature and the foibles of the human condition will lead some of us always into those directions. And as Trevor said, if you don't play the game, are you able to actually operate in that society? You know, can you win as a business? I mean, Herman gave us his example of a big business actively engaged in you know, corrupt activities, bribing people, and it was acceptable. It was even in the books. And how do you compete against an organization like that if you're not doing that? You know, do you simply pack your bags and leave and go somewhere else and try and start a different business? But are you not going to run back into exactly the same challenge? So yeah, for me, it's a very complex and very difficult question. I think we've only just scraped the surface. So yeah, those are my thoughts, Lee. So back to you to wrap us up and tell us where we're going tomorrow. And I don't think we're going to go on colonialism. That's a dangerous one.
No, we are not going to go down the route of colonialism, but Trevor must be careful that he doesn't raise that.
Right.
Yes, if that's possible for Trevor. But I would like to follow this thought train around ethics and what does it take to be an ethical person in an unethical world. So let's talk about that. Let's how if there is a system, and I think there are certainly systems in place that perpetuate corruption and unethical behavior, how do we remain ethical in the midst of that? So we'd like to hear your thoughts. Look forward to hearing it tomorrow.
Great, thanks, Lee. So everybody go off, be on your best behavior, be as ethical and uncorruptible as you possibly can be during the rest of the day, but have a good one. We'll see you in the morning. Go well. Cheers.